There's a lot of scrutiny lately on the supposed criminal and even terrorist financiers who gave to the Freedom Convoy fundraisers in Canada. The Canadian government has threatened to, and in some cases already frozen, their accounts. Their information was hacked and distributed online. Supposed journalists have very little interest in uncovering the criminal responsible for that hack, even though there's a psychopath openly screaming into the internet that he did it.
Yes, I doxed the truckers! I did it! It was me! I hacked Give, Send, Go, baby! Come at me! What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do to me, huh?
But apparently there's much more interest in emailing the donors to explain themselves. And in at least one case, all that heat brought the shutdown of a family business, even though the entire premise is these donors are wrong to be supporting a cause that was an inconvenience to area businesses. With treatment like this, you'd think they killed somebody or were plotting to, but no, it turns out even if you do actually try to kill somebody, so long as your politics are correct, the money for you gets distributed just fine. In fact, the check for your $100,000 bail is delivered on camera. And you walk out of jail on camera too, with not just much less media scrutiny, but in many instances, actual media cover. Kind and positive reporting about how you're just a nice young man in a difficult situation deserving of sympathy. When you have the wrong politics, everything you do is akin to murder. When you have the right politics, actual attempted murder is explained and excused away. That is the story of Quintez Brown, a perfect demonstration and juxtaposition for how crimes are manufactured and concealed simultaneously, depending on the cause supported and the journalistic priorities in reporting on it. Quintez Brown walked out of Louisville Metro Corrections on Wednesday, bailed out and released to home incarceration on charges of attempted murder and wanton endangerment after Brown stormed the office of Louisville Democratic mayoral candidate Craig Greenberg on Monday morning and took multiple shots with a Glock 9mm handgun within about 10 feet of the candidate and his staff. The candidate was grazed but not seriously injured, the only thing separating this story from a mass shooting statistic apparently being Brown's terrible shooting skills. According to that mayoral candidate, Craig Greenberg, there is no connection or association between him and Brown other than they both were running for Louisville city office. Greenberg for mayor, and he still is despite this shooting, and Quintez Brown for city council. Brown posted a campaign video on Twitter in December, apparently seeking to represent the entire continent of Africa within Louisville city government. Quintez Brown has been a Black Lives Matter activist in Louisville for many years, organizing and protesting on behalf of Breonna Taylor and others, and to defund the police.
Police is not equal order. Police is not equal safety or security.
As anger over the deaths of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and others has boiled over.
The police are not here to protect and serve.
Defund the police! One idea is gaining traction in cities all over the country. Defund the police.
The woman quoted in that news piece was Chanel Helm, the leader of Black Lives Matter Louisville, with whom Quintez Brown has long worked and is a personal friend. So how did Quintez Brown get bailed out of jail for attempted murder? Well, that's how. Deep pockets lined by donors to the Louisville Black Lives Matter organization, which operates the Louisville Community Bail Fund, who cut the check. Or, depending on what reporting you see, it was just an unspecified local nonprofit who bailed Brown out, according to a local TV station. According to national ABC News, it was just an unspecified community organization.
The suspect, described as a social justice activist, a community organization freed him on $100,000 cash bonds.
But even that claim should make you wonder, how exactly is a community charity, apparently organized around bailing attempted murderers out of jail, so successful at raising huge sums of money? Well, this isn't about the release of an attempted murderer back into the community. That's a mischaracterization. This is just about a young man with mental health problems getting the care he so desperately needs. That's the case of that Black Lives Matter leader, Chanel Helm, a claim coddled by media interviews without much, if any, critical questioning.
Mental health problems. That's what Louisville Community Bail Fund co-founder and Black Lives Matter Louisville organizer Chanel Helm suspects.
We are not at all confident that the state has the adequate needs and support for them in the mental health care field.
See, Quintez Brown had PTSD after the last couple years of social unrest and the coronavirus pandemic, as though we all haven't suffered similar inconveniences or injustices in that time frame. I know a lot of people out of a job or with compromised livelihoods, but I don't know a lot of attempted murderers. Well, yeah, but it's not just his mental health issues, Helm says. It's the fact that, on balance, he's actually stopping gun violence. See, we need to get this guy out of jail because even though he had this momentary lapse of trying to shoot several people, he has created so many opportunities for others to end gun violence in the community with his activism. Yeah, release the attempted mass shooter to achieve gun safety. Got it. But that's where the irony starts getting really deep here, because it's not just the Black Lives Matter leader claiming that Brown's anti-gun activism is some sort of ad hoc justification here. Brown was, in fact, very public himself with his anti-gun activism and celebrated by others for it. In summer 2019, Brown wrote an op-ed in Louisville's largest newspaper blasting Kentucky's coming constitutional carry policy as proof that life doesn't matter to gun-loving Republicans. In the article, he complained that he, a young inner-city black male, would be summarily executed if he ever even tried to carry concealed. Until he did carry concealed and tried to execute other people. And not only was he not killed for that, but he was released to his home within 48 hours. His attempted case against self-defense rights became a nearly lethal demonstration for them. But thankfully, the only thing worse than his reasoning is his marksmanship. But still, his activism was enough to catch the attention of powerful figures in media and politics. Here was Quintez Brown on Joy Reid's MSNBC show at March for Our Lives 2018.
We need common sense gun reform. Get rid of assault rifles. Nonviolent direct action takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. So one thing that we can do is get people out here voting.
Well, good for him. He gave that nonviolent direct action 4 long, patient years of opportunity before he committed the exact sort of direct violent action he was warning about. But in fairness, I haven't seen the exact specs of his Glock and whether it counts as an assault weapon or not. So it's possible he was just trying to commit a common sense mass shooting. A year later, in 2019, Brown was selected to be one of 22 participants nationally celebrated by former President Obama's My Brother's Keeper program. Brown was a rising face for his activism in closing racial achievement gaps. His face is rising, yours should be ducking under some cover because he's trying to shoot it. But if anybody could do worse than Quintez Brown and his Black Lives Matter allies in his own defense, it would be a select few dedicated blue checks and air quotes journalists taking a break from their usual urgent warnings about the consequences of misinformation. These aren't common, they are isolated, sure, but the absurdity can't go without mention. Former Biden campaign staffer Cliff Schechter knee-jerk reacted harder and more wrongly than Joe did with Kyle Rittenhouse. Cliff says, insane. A lunatic attempts to assassinate a Louisville mayoral candidate. This is what conspiratorial right-wing rhetoric and guns everywhere gets us. I'm afraid this is going to get much, much worse. Yes, if only we had more reasonable left-wing perspectives about common sense gun reform, that surely would have stopped this leftist with reasonable perspectives about common sense gun reform. But maybe Cliff's defense is just a wrong, premature reaction before all the facts were in. It's not a good defense, but I don't wait for the evidence before jumping to conclusions is still a better defense than I saw the evidence and I still don't care. That's the perspective of the Las Vegas Sun, publishing in an op-ed from their editorial board on Wednesday. The terrifying incident in Louisville reveals the dangers of the talk coming from the right about civil war and political violence. And no, that isn't based on an assumption of who the shooter might be. They know who he is, and they note he has no known ties to any right-wing organizations. But the shooting comes amid a rise in threats to politicians fueled by increasing violent rhetoric coming from extremist Republicans. Well, even if that premise was demonstrably true, which it isn't, it's highly debatable at best, how do one person's crimes explain another's? If I killed somebody, would it make sense to say Ted Kaczynski did it first, or my murder came at a time of higher than average murders, so, it's more understandable. Do other people's crimes explain my crimes, or do my crimes just make me a criminal? And speaking of other people's crimes, the lack of curiosity about why we apparently don't consider Black Lives Matter donations to be support for other people's crimes in the same way that Freedom Convoy donations supposedly are can't be understated, but the thing is, that curiosity doesn't even have to be malicious or political in its intent. Sure, you could question if Louisville BLM donors intentionally support crime or not, and you could note how this fundraising platform they use is shared and promoted by many prominent Democrats. And those questions certainly have validity, but there's a broader question beyond all the politics that everyone of all persuasions should be interested in. Is this just simple fraud? Because Black Lives Matter is facing legal scrutiny all across the country because nobody really knows where the money is going and for what purposes. Money raised on the idea of supporting Black people victimized at the hands of law enforcement is just disappearing into mystery pockets, and even typically friendly tech giants like Amazon and left-wing states like California and Washington are scrutinizing group leadership for the lack of financial transparency. When donors gave to Black Lives Matter Louisville, was this ever the intended purpose of the donation? To bail out the personal friend of the group's leader for a heinous crime? Or was this yet another corrupt transaction of a dollar received for one purpose, but then reallocated to something else of no relevance to the donor's wishes, just personal relevance to the people entrusted to manage that money? I raise that question out of genuine curiosity, not rhetorically, and not to directly accuse. I don't know who the donors are, and I don't know their reasons. It is, of course, entirely possible that there are just a few mega donors, and bailing out attempted murderers is perfectly consistent with their purpose for the money, but that's likely not all of it. One of the fundraising pages for Louisville BLM shows thousands of individual contributions. Was the intent of those thousands actually to bail an attempted murderer out of jail? An attempted murderer who happens to be good friends with the organizer? Or did these donors think they were contributing to something else entirely? The way this looks, I won't be surprised to learn that Quintez Brown's actual Glock and ammunition were purchased with supporter-donated Black Lives Matter money. But of course, I won't hold my breath for the necessary questions to be asked to find out. Just let me know if you see any news stories about how a local nonprofit purchased much-needed personal care supplies for a mentally unwell man. The information might be in that one somewhere, probably ironically buried under several prior paragraphs warning you about the dangers of misinformation. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Minds. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.